Welcome to the Christian Men at Work podcast, where I interview men from all walks of life with varying job titles who have one thing in common. They are all choosing daily to live out their Christian faith through their work, and because of that, they are leading, prospering, glorifying God, and experiencing joy and purpose in their work, and you can too. Men at Work, welcome to episode 36. Today I'm going to be interviewing Shawn Carney, who is president of 40 Days for Life. So we'll be talking about that in just a minute. Just wanted to make a few comments. This issue of abortion and pro-life just seems to keep coming up in my life. As I interviewed two men previously who are actively involved in the pro-life movement, Jeff Bradford and Kurt Condrich. If you haven't heard those interviews and you have an interest in that area, please check those out. And as I shared in earlier interviews, I participated in an abortion when I got a girl pregnant when I was a young man. And I mean, it was the biggest mistake I've ever made. But I think it's healthy to be open about our past sins, and no sin is too great for God, and by His grace I'm forgiven for that. And but I feel very strongly about the pro-life issue. To me, it's just real clear cut. I mean, there's a lot of political issues that I have to check myself sometimes and make sure that I'm on the right side, or that I'm maybe getting too excited about political issues, and when I should be focused more on spiritual issues. But for me, the pro-life is just, there's no question about it. It's a right and wrong issue. And so when I was contacted to interview Shawn Carney, I was very excited about the opportunity. I had heard about 40 Days for Life, but really honestly didn't know much about it, and I learned a lot through this interview. So let me go ahead and introduce him. Shawn Carney is the co-founder, president, and CEO of 40 Days for Life, a pro-life organization that holds campaigns across the United States and around the world. When he was a student at Texas A&M in 2004, Carney and three other people held an hour of prayer around an old wooden table to ask God how to end abortion in Bryan College Station. That prayer led to the first 40 Days for Life campaign. Carney, who added the title of CEO in 2016, has been instrumental in the growth of 40 Days for Life into a national and then an international organization. The organization has now conducted more than 5,600 campaigns in 50 countries. Carney has also produced and hosted award-winning pro-life documentaries for the Eternal Word Television Network, EWTN. He is the co-author of 40 Days for Life, Discover What God Has Done, Imagine What He Can Do, and his new book, The Beginning of the End of Abortion, will be released, it actually was released earlier this year, September 12th, by Capella Books. Carney is one of the most sought-after pro-life speakers in the world. He also has been featured by mainstream media outlets such as The Laura Ingraham Show, The O'Reilly Factor, and USA Today, and Christian outlets such as The Christian Post, Sirius XM, Catholic Radio, EWTN Radio, and Focus on the Family. Before 40 Days for Life, Carney was the executive director of the Coalition for Life, and he lives in Houston with his wife and 7 children. Let's get right to our interview. Shawn, thanks so much for joining the call today. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation. And before we get into the specific questions about you and your ministry, I want to ask you to kind of get our bearings. How and when did you become a Christian?
Well, I was a kid. I grew up in Tyler, Texas, which is the Bible Belt. It's in East Texas, and it is a Baptist country. I was blessed with being raised around great Southern Baptist, and I was Catholic. And so Tyler, Texas is literally 2% Catholic. So I went to a Catholic school. was baptized Catholic, and I'm still Catholic. And my Catholic school was full of Baptists, which was always a joke among the students and the teachers. And, you know, we always went to church every Sunday. My parents raised us to be pro-life. But as we all know, there's sort of conversions, and then there's true, you know, interior conversions. And I would say that happened in high school. It was a number of different events where I felt the presence of God in my life. I knew he wanted something from me, and I came to that reality that life is not about me just doing whatever I want to do, but about serving him. And so I was about 16 when I went through that and just started discerning what God wanted from me in my life, and that certainly led me to the pro-life movement.
Okay, great. Now, before we talk specifically about the ministry that you're a part of, that you lead and founded, kind of walk us through maybe from that point you just described up to, and then maybe go ahead and describe how you started 40 Days for Life and what it's all about. But before you do that, if you could just kind of walk through how you got from A to B, so to speak.
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to the Baptists. We had in Tyler, Texas, there weren't a lot of priests, right, because it's 2% Catholic. So we were fortunate enough we had priests from Ireland. They were young priests, never been to Texas before, and they taught in the school that I was in. And they got along really well with all of the preachers in town. I don't know, I think a lot of it had to do with golf. But, you know, they knew all the Baptist preachers, and they encouraged us to go to the largest pro-life event at the time in my town, which was Sanctity of Human Life Sunday at Green Acres Baptist Church. So when I was in like the 8th grade, I heard Carol Everett speak, and she ran 4 abortion facilities in Dallas before her conversion to Christ in the early 1990s. And that really struck me as an 8th grader, and I got really convicted about, number one, the mercy of God, how this woman could manipulate and lie, and all of the things that Carol talks about so articulately in her speeches, and do so to end the life of unborn children. So I got really convicted on the pro-life issue. I was in middle school, then high school. But it really wasn't until I went to college at Texas A&M University in College Station, and I was invited by my then girlfriend. She's now my wife and mother of our 7 children. She would go out and peacefully pray at an abortion facility. And I had never seen an abortion facility before in my life. To my knowledge, I'd never met anyone who ever had an abortion. And frankly, I didn't really want to go. It was kind of like, I'm a Christian and I want to stand for Christ. And then it's like, okay, well, we'll go out there. We're going to pray and offer alternatives. And I just kind of shrank up. And so, but you know, we were dating and I married way up. So I went when she invited me, and it really had a profound impact on me seeing my peers, other 18, 19-year-old women going in, having abortions, being driven by their 18, 19-year-old boyfriends who were often very distant from the reality of what was going on. And so I got hooked, and that was it. I became a sidewalk counselor and started volunteering for the local pro-life organization that existed in my college town. So what is 40 Days for Life all about? What sets it apart from maybe other pro-life organizations? Let's just start with that. Yeah, well, we did the first 40 Days for Life campaign in 2004. I was a junior in college, and it was a result of seeing our abortion numbers go up at our local Planned Parenthood abortion facility. And so we decided, what if we just handed this time period that God gives us throughout Scripture to transform ourselves, to transform cultures? What if we apply that to abortion? So we did 40 Days for Life, which was 40 days of prayer and fasting, 40 days of community outreach, and 40 days of a nonstop peaceful vigil. And so from the beginning, 40 Days for Life has been law-abiding, it's been peaceful, but at its foundation, it has been centered on prayer. Because if we run out the door to try to go end abortion in our culture, we're gonna last about 2 weeks. The world is just gonna eat us up. This is a grave evil, and we have to be praying. And so that was at the foundation. And in 2007, when we did that first campaign, it was me and David Beeright, my wife, and we saw a lot of new people get involved in our community, but we never imagined it would go anywhere. And then city after city started calling us saying, hey, we want to bring 40 Days for Life. So in 2007, David and I launched 40 Days for Life as a nationally coordinated effort. And, it's now spread to 770 cities in over 50 countries. And I think what sets it apart is that it gives people locally, the most important level, the local level, an invitation to go save a life for somebody in their community that's going to have an abortion or schedule an abortion. And so that's the reason I think so many people were tired of waiting on Washington, D.C. to correct this moral crisis. And they just wanted it's missionary territory, and it's in our neighborhood.
Well, it's interesting because the headlines when it comes to the pro-life movement, it seems like is around the legislature, who's going to be in the Supreme Court and what laws could potentially change along this front. And I've heard it said, I think by John Stonestreet and others, that we need to make abortion not just illegal but unthinkable. And I guess that raises the question, well, how do you do that? How do you actually change the culture? And I guess the short answer for your organization is prayer, I guess. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. It's prayer, and it's going out there to the front lines. Nobody grows up wanting an abortion. Nobody has an abortion because they're a Democrat or a Republican. They have an abortion because they feel that they have no freedom and they feel that they have no choice. And when we go out there and are, as Mother Teresa famously and often said, the hands and feet of Christ, this is the darkest point in our culture. And so many women, we've had over 15,000 turn around at the last minute, and they say, look, I literally asked God for a sign. I knew what I was doing was wrong. And you out there in the snow or the heat or the rain wore that sign, and I just can't do it. And so it's the presence of being out there. It defeats the loneliness that abortion survives on so often. And so, and we need pro-life presidents. We have one. We need good judicial nominations. We need to defund Planned Parenthood. We need all of those things. But you're right, that sort of captures a lot of the headlines when we see the undercurrent, which for better or for worse has gone unnoticed, of hearts and minds changing on abortion. I mean, here we are, 45 years of legalized abortion since 1973. This technically should be something we're all just sort of like, we lost that battle, it's here to stay. And yet the opposite has happened. Pregnancy resource centers now outnumber abortion providers 3-1. Over half of all the abortion facilities in America have closed since 1991. And so we see this trend that they are losing at the local level. They're losing on hearts and minds. Our most powerful voices are the women who have laid on that table and had an abortion, or the doctors who have done an abortion, or those who have advocated and sold abortion and worked in the industry. Those are strong voices in our movement, and you don't have that on the opposite end. There's not a mom running a pregnancy center who raised 5 children and then discovered she was supposed to be running an abortion clinic. And so the conversion gate is only swung in one direction, and that should give us great hope, because we're a movement of converts, and a movement of converts is a movement of hope.
How do you see the pro-life issue playing out in the upcoming elections?
I think it's huge because, half the country is still trying to pick their mouth off the ground with the fact that Donald Trump did win on election night. And so I think the shock value of so many people that despise him and didn't want him and all the stuff. I think that now they're seeing, gosh, he made a lot of pro-life promises and he's carrying them out. And so the election of Donald Trump has definitely elevated the abortion issue on a much more public scale. He's been fantastic for that, and he's fulfilled up to now all of his promises except defunding Planned Parenthood, which he's tried to do. So, the issue being in the midterms is huge because he could very likely get 2 more nominations if he's reelected. He may get 1 more in this term, but if he's reelected, he for sure will get at least 1 or 2 more, and that would just completely throw the Supreme Court. And, if you hate Donald Trump, if you love Donald Trump, if you only voted for Donald Trump because he was pro-life, that you'd never have him over at your house for Thanksgiving, whatever the reason is, these things transcend him and his personality. This is stuff that impacts my grandkids, and I don't even have any grandkids. I have 7 small kids. But these young Supreme Court justices this is how you transform the culture. This is how you it's not how you transform hearts and minds, but it's how you transform the culture as it appeals to the law. And whether you can send your kid to a Christian school, and that Christian school is forced by the government to hire a married homosexual couple, or they're required to teach the value of abortion. These are things that long term are good for the Supreme Court to not allow.
Can you walk us through some statistics? The ugly numbers in terms of how many babies have been lost, but then on as it relates to your organization, how many clinics have been closed, how many babies have been saved, and maybe talk a little bit about how you track those numbers.
Absolutely. Just to break it down for folks and make it easy, there's 3,000 abortions, give or take, every day in the United States of America alone, 3,000. Every year in the world, there are 56 million abortions. There is no other tragedy, or in fact, that is, Dave, that's all the other causes of death per year combined equal the same amount as we abort. So we lose 56 million people to cancer, heart disease, car accidents every single year. We lose an additional 56 million unborn through abortion every year. So that's the number where you're like, oh my God, it's just staggering. You kind of like throwing your hands up in the air listening to this podcast going, what are we doing? It's all over. And yet, we see in the United States all of these trends that we're talking about. For 40 Days for Life, we went from 1 city to now 770 cities in over 50 countries. We have seen 15,000 moms that we know of turn around at the very last moment. One of the most beautiful stats that we have, I think, is the 177 workers who have had a change of heart and left their job. And what the workers say, the Planned Parenthood workers, is that Planned Parenthood, who's the largest abortion operation in America, their internal number says that the no-show rate for an abortion appointment goes as high as 75% when people are out there praying. And so when we say, praise God, we've seen 15,000 women turn around. Those are only the ones that we document, that we know about, that they tell us, I'm choosing life. We're in contact, usually ongoing contact with them. They send pictures of birthday parties and t-ball games and all these beautiful things as the years go by. But that does not take into account the ones who never show up because they just drive on. And we've had hundreds of women come and say, look, you don't know me, but I was going in here last year for an abortion and you guys were out here and I want to introduce you to my little girl. And that happens all the time. And I put a lot of those in the book as well. But, the numbers this fall have been very encouraging because we're approaching the 100th abortion facility to close their doors and go out of business following multiple 40 Days for Life campaigns outside. And so it does have a huge impact on the bottom line of an abortion business, and it's very encouraging to see. Our office, the 40 Days for Life headquarters, is inside the former Planned Parenthood abortion facility where the campaign started way back in 2004. That facility is one of those 100, and it closed in 2013, and we, by the grace of God, turned it into our headquarters.
That's pretty cool. Can you give me a quick update, and I'm sure you're more knowledgeable on this than me and most of our listeners, on the prospect of Planned Parenthood losing their funding? I mean, I hear that talked about off and on, and I hear about different efforts aimed at that. Can you give us a quick update on that?
Yeah, the pro-life, the president was elected and said, okay, I want to defund Planned Parenthood. And in some aspects, the pro-life movement wasn't expecting him to want to do it. It was literally the week he was inaugurated. And so a lot of the problems and why it hasn't been done now, or yet anyways, is the complications of their funding being tied up with Medicaid. And people don't want to mess with Medicaid. You start talking about to voters about we're gonna mess with Medicaid. They sort of jump ship on defunding Planned Parenthood. And so there are some wonderful pro-life groups in D.C. Coming up with ways to defund them and not touch those other government programs. But they absolutely have to be defunded. It's just shameful that we're sending these people $500 million of our tax money. And, that's not obviously the worst thing about abortion. The worst thing is that it ends the life of an unrepeatable little boy or little girl made in the image and likeness of God. And so, but forcing Christians to pay for it, forcing taxpayers to pay for it, obviously sends something really horrible and evil, just in an even worse light. So that's sort of the update. It's been shelved. I feel like I could say that. I mean, it's being screamed about by the pro-life movement. We all want it. But right now, politically, it doesn't seem like, in the next few months, it's going to be high on the agenda. I hope that changes, and that certainly is our goal. But it seems like it's going to take another year to get it done.
I'm kind of curious about what kind of press you have received, because those are pretty big numbers that you've talked about in terms of the number of events that you have and the success rate you've had. But I'll be honest, just from my own observation of coverage, I went into this interview not knowing a whole lot about your organization. And that's my own fault probably for not being better informed. But my impression of when I hear about abortion clinics and I think about what kind of press coverage there has been, of course, I think back to, isolated events that happened a long time ago where some crazy person went and shot up an abortion clinic. But other than that, I don't feel like there's been much coverage of what you're doing. Am I just missing it, or is that maybe a fair statement? What kind of press coverage have you gotten, I guess, is maybe a better question.
I think you're right, and I mentioned that earlier, that there's been this undercurrent, and for better or for worse, it hasn't been noticed by the media. I would say we have not gotten a lot of national press coverage. The only time we also haven't had anything go wrong. We haven't had anybody get arrested. We haven't had some crazy person go out and throw a brick, through an abortion clinic. We haven't had any of that. So we stayed out of the news in the positive sense. But we get tons of local news coverage, and we get tons of positive local news coverage from NBC affiliates and CBS affiliates and Fox affiliates. And so all over the country, because they go out, and it's local stories, but they're interviewing our our leaders, who are these wonderful people, who maybe have a 5-year-old next to them and are pregnant with another baby, and they're joyful and they're out there praying, and then they go and they interview the Planned Parenthood workers and they say, we're under siege, these people are lunatics, and they don't buy it. And so our local coverage has been great. One of the things that is our biggest compliment, it has been from the ACLU. In the ACLU, when we were basically a year off the ground, and 40 Days for Life was really starting to grow, the ACLU said that this is the greatest threat to choice because it's so well organized and it's local and people can do it. They can bring it to their community. And, we took that as a compliment, but it's, for the most part, you're right. We have not gotten a lot of national news coverage. And at the same time, we've certainly been noticed by the abortion industry, but there's really nothing they can do to combat 40 Days for Life unless we destroy the Constitution and get rid of freedom of speech. And so, we're very well protected in our mission. We just have to do what is the hardest thing to do, which is to go do it, to go out in the rain and the heat and the snow and face a little persecution and not have everyone in the world like us, but be there as that, missionary witness to our brothers and our sisters who are seeking abortions and to our brothers and our sisters who are working in the abortion industry.
You mentioned about ACLU. I was curious about that because it just seems like that the courts has been a method of attacking so many ministries in Christianity today. Has that been a big issue for your organization as far as legal challenges to what you're doing?
Not anything that's developed. The one thing that we get targeted in, and they were successful in the United Kingdom and in Canada, and that is implementing buffer zones where you can, it just sounds insane for a Western democracy, but buffer zones in Canada and in England now, you can't speak about the pro-life side of abortion within 50 meters. They don't have yards, but they should. Within 50 meters of an abortion facility in Canada or the UK. Now, the abortion industry has tried that in the United States, and unanimously it has been shot down by the Supreme Court every single time. You could take the most liberal Supreme Court justices of the last 20 years in the United States. Even they said, and they always cite the same reason, this is simply un-American. And so, recently this happened. We had 2 cases, really one big case over the summer, and the state of California was trying to force pregnancy resource centers to refer for abortion. Of course, it's ridiculous, and so that got shot down. The other victory was the Christian man in Colorado who refused to bake a cake for a homosexual wedding. And so the court sided with him, which that helps us in the freedom of speech. His reason for doing so was that he was a Christian. And so, they sided with him. So, those kind of victories are good for us, but where we've been targeted, definitely in England. They hate 40 Days for Life in England. And we get tons of national media coverage in England, The Guardian, the BBC, the Daily Mail. We get a lot of coverage in England. And, they targeted us and tried to get people away, and they won. It was successful. It really changes how we approach a lot of the campaigns there.
I want to shift gears and allow enough time to talk about your new book. I just want to make one quick comment based on what we've been talking about. It seems like this theme of local, and we talk a lot about how grassroots is the most important way to go about things, and yet it's so easy, it seems like, to always focus on the big national solution. So I'm impressed by how your organization is so focused locally, and that plays itself out in many, many ways.
Yeah, it really does. And this is, our leaders, these are the heroes, people who raise their hand and say, I want to do 40 Days for Life in Omaha. I want to do it in San Diego. I want to do it in Orlando. These are volunteers, most of them, 92% are volunteers. The other 8% run local pro-life organizations and just do 40 Days for Life along with that. So most of these are volunteers, and these are stay-at-home moms. These are retired colonels. We have airline pilots. People will read about a lot of them in the book. But these are the heroes. You know, they have jobs. They have a lot going on, and we train them for 3 months going into a campaign. And most of them say, I had never done a media interview before I led my local campaign. I had never introduced myself to my local police chief. I had never gone to a city council meeting. I had never looked up my city ordinance. Can I stick a cross in the ground, or is that illegal? And so, it's sort of a crash course. And now, we're very established. We've had campaigns in a lot of places for 10 whole years. So, it's beautiful to see. That's what makes America so great, and this is love of God and love of neighbor, but it's also love of country. And I don't think anybody takes advantage of freedom of speech more than the pro-life movement. And, we do this as a patriotic duty to use our rights to preserve our future. There's nothing more basic than that. And if we don't have children, we're not going to have a future. And, the classic line about you're judged based on how you treat your most vulnerable in society, it's a very scary statement, I think, for those of us in the United States and in the West in general, is, we have the most disrespectful and degrading reasons of why someone should get an abortion. And yet when we go out there, we remind our culture, certainly remind the men and women seeking abortions, that there's a love out there for them and for their baby that they just don't realize in the current circumstances.
All right, let's talk about your new book, The Beginning of the End of Abortion. Is that the correct title?
You got it.
All right. Why did you decide to write this book, and what's it all about?
Well, because number one, I think we're seeing the beginning of the end of abortion, and I take through the reader why in the book and show them these trends that aren't, as you mentioned, reported in the media, but how hearts and minds are being changed at the local level, and how some of the most notorious abortion facilities in our country have been closing. Literally, the guy that invented the partial birth abortion procedure, his abortion facility closed 8 months ago. It wasn't one media story about it. This guy made a huge name for himself in the 1990s and the early 2000s, and just couldn't stay open. And so, there's so much good going on. It's a very hope-filled book. It's an uplifting book. There's 40 true stories at the end of each chapter. There's a scripture verse and a prayer reflection, so you could definitely use it, for 8 to 9 minutes every morning, just reading through and adding it to your daily devotion and your prayers, or you can just read it right through. It moves very fast. And it's true. It's true stories, and it's very exciting to see how God is using so many people around the world to end abortion. It's not meant to be a provocative title. It's a descriptive title, and I cover that throughout the book.
Is there a point at which you think there was actually a shift, changing the tide, so to speak, with regard to abortion?
Yeah, I think it was about 15 years ago. I think we hit the point where it was okay to talk about it. It was okay to say, I had an abortion and it just didn't work out. I've regretted it. I've regretted ever being part of it. We have men saying that. I had a 77-year-old man say that he finally went on a retreat for an illegal abortion he paid for a girlfriend that he broke up with her the next week, got married, was married 50 years before he could tell his wife, and he'd been carrying that his whole life, and so I think about 15 years ago, we just all of these kids. I'm 36, but now thankfully I feel old with the March for Life because it gets younger every year. But a lot of these millennials and younger, they're even if they leave their Christian faith, they've seen their siblings' ultrasound photos. They've all seen ultrasound photos, and we didn't have that for the baby boomers. And they didn't see ultrasounds until their grandkids were having them. So you sort of have this trend where there's a greater respect, thankfully, for science and the technology that we use to reveal the beauty of what's going on in the womb. And younger people are uncomfortable with that. They will support some other wacko things in our culture, but they're almost always pro-life because it's a scientific reality.
Is there a difference between the status of this movement in the U.S. versus internationally? I know you mentioned a couple of specific countries, Canada and UK, where the laws are different. But in general, how would you describe the pro-life movement internationally versus in the U.S.?
It's the standard. It's the model. The world has come knocking on our door, and as a country, we have helped export abortion to other countries, but we've also exported the solution through pregnancy centers and resources. 40 Days for Life has gone to 50 countries, but it is the standard. We need to be very proud of that as an American, and I hit that hard in the book. We cannot get discouraged. There's no throwing your hands up in the air. First off, we don't have that ability as Christians. We never lose hope or despair because we have victory in the cross. But this is a dead issue in most of Europe, with the exception of Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. The idea of opposing abortion in any way is ludicrous and laughable to a lot of these places. So America is the standard. They look to us, and thank God. 45 years of legalized abortion, and the pro-life movement is larger than it's ever been. It has more power and influence than it's ever had, and it is only getting larger for the right reasons, which is people are changing their mind about it. So that should give us great hope, and I think I hit that very hard in the new book, and the reader should be really encouraged. I was very fortunate to get some great endorsements, and Eric Metaxas endorsed the book, and Governor Mike Huckabee and Ruth Graham, and as they read through it, they saw these trends that they see of just people, their age, just saying, I don't support this anymore. And I want to do something about it. And Eric Metaxas definitely pointed out the patriotic nature as he has seen 40 Days for Life grow. And just, it points to the fact that we Americans still, if we can do something about something we don't like, we'll do it. And I think that's a very encouraging thing that doesn't exist in other parts of the world.
You mentioned about a lot of stories in your book. Is there one story in particular that you could share with us?
Yeah, there's one is in Virginia. We had a pilot. He flew the 757 for United Airlines, and he led a campaign. And this abortion doctor was in a strip center, and so a pregnancy center moved in next door, and they shared a wall with the abortion doctor, which was great for them because they could get women just right in to their pregnancy center who could turn around at the last minute. But one of the things is because they shared a wall, they could actually hear when the abortions were going on. And so they realized all the abortions happened in this one room. So they built a chapel on the other side of the room. And one day a group of people, Christians, were in that chapel praying and just sort of singing and praying for the abortions as they could hear them going on next door. And the abortion doctor came out the next day to the 40 Days for Life volunteers, and he was sort of shaking, and he said, I can't do this anymore. I heard those people praying. I heard those people singing, and it reminded me of my childhood faith. And he he had grown up Catholic and had left his faith. And he said, I can't do this anymore. And he quit. He never did another abortion. His abortion facility ended up closing. And, you know, I wrote a whole chapter on this, but it's a beautiful, powerful story, right? This is the mercy of God at work. This is what we should expect to happen. This is why Christ came, not for the righteous, but for sinners. And yet I also go into just the struggles of the local leaders. You know, they had a lot of battles over many years of just getting their campaign going and all of that. And it was their fortitude, it was their persistence, it was their faith in God that they just kept going. And lo and behold, they look up and they, to this day, can't believe it. They're really excited that it's in the book because they're like, our abortion has had a conversion and our abortion facility closed. Like, how small do we think in the eyes of compared to what God can actually accomplish? And so that chapter 2, you don't have to buy the book to read that. I gave that chapter away, so if people go to 40daysforlife.com/book, they can actually download 2 free chapters, and that's one of the chapters that they can get.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. Well, as we kind of get close to wrapping up here, I wanted to I have one other specific question, and it has to do with the role of men in this movement. I've admitted this in another interview where I've interviewed 2 other men who are in the pro-life movement, and in one of those interviews, I shared that I participated in abortion as a young man, and that led to some discussion. I don't want to focus on my story. It's the biggest mistake I made, but it strikes me how powerful it is when men are involved in this movement. And since that's one of the themes of this podcast, we're really kind of focused on men. Is there anything you'd like to say about that issue?
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Men need to be in this in the pro-life movement. And I think men, they don't do what you have courageously done. Men usually are not involved for one or 2 reasons. And number one, they fall into the lie, or it's just an excuse that it's a woman's issue. I have no business here, even though women don't conceive children on their own. And or number 2, they've had a past of sexual immorality, or they have an abortion in their past, and they just feel like, I mean, come on, I can't possibly tell someone else not to do it. You know, those are usually the two reasons. Or they just, my wife does that. She does all the church stuff. She does all the pro-life stuff. So those are usually the reasons they don't get into the game, if you will. I wrote a whole chapter on this, and I always love using the Green Bay guys as an example, because our leader in Green Bay was named Jim Ball. And he drove past and he saw the 40 Days campaign on his way to work, and he's like, what the heck is this happening in Green Bay, Wisconsin? So he pulls over and he asked the men out there, what are you doing? And they're like, we're praying for an end to abortion. And they had signs that said pray to end abortion, and he just thought, why am I not doing that? I'm pro-life and I'm Christian, but I just never really did anything about it. These guys are actually doing something about it. And he just went all in. He started leading the campaign. He led 24-hour vigils in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It's freezing. And he created a little program called Sleep No More, where men take the night shift from 11 o'clock at night to 8 o'clock in the morning. And he just challenged men, and he's definitely a man's man. And he says, hey, all these men, we go and we drink beer and sit out at the Packer game when it's 2 degrees outside. We sit in a deer stand and go hunting at 4 o'clock in the morning when it's below freezing. We can stand vigil and stand post and pray for an end to abortion, because men have dropped the ball for too long. And, I think that's really encouraging. I tell you who love men being involved in the pro-life movement, and that's women, because they often feel like that they're alone. And so I would definitely encourage men. I personally was very challenged when I was 20 years old. I heard 5 women share their testimonies, and I was already really involved in the pro-life movement. But even then I was like, what am I really doing? Like, I need to step it up. That's when I decided to become a sidewalk counselor. So I think it helps. I think it helps to challenge men. and then build them up and say, no one else can replace us. We have to be the defenders of the family and the defenders of life.
Well, I agree with all that. If anyone listening wants to learn more about you and 40 Days for Life, I think you mentioned the website earlier, but how would they go about learning more?
Well, they can find their local vigil at 40daysforlife.com. It's the number 40. You can also get the book on that website. We also have a weekly podcast that comes out every Tuesday. I think we're 150 episodes in, and so there's tons of podcasts they can listen to at 40daysforlife.com, or you get the podcast on iTunes, and people can get the book as well on our website or on Amazon.
Any final thoughts you want to share before we finish this?
I just want to thank you, first off, for doing this, and just encourage the men out there to live our faith. What a great, epic battle we are in right now to live for Christ. You know, it seems like the world comes up with new ways every day to reject our Lord, and yet He is with us in the midst of all of this, and He's our source. He's our source of strength, and He came into the world through a family, and many of us have families, or we're all part of a family, and we need to trust Him to restore the family and restore life in this great, great country that we live in.
Well said. This has been an awesome interview, and I thank you very much for your time, and hope you have a great day.
Okay, I appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
All right. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Men at Work, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Before I say goodbye, I wanted to give you a recommendation to go see the movie Gosnell. If it's still available in the theaters, hopefully it is. It's a very, very powerful issue. If you are interested in this pro-life issue, I encourage you to check that out. I actually took my family and my 2 daughters and my wife with me to see it. It was difficult to watch, but I'm glad we went. It was very, very powerful movie. But I hope you enjoyed this interview. We just heard about Shawn Carney's journey, being Spirit-led and living out his Christian faith at his work. Each of our journeys are unique, but hopefully you've heard something in this episode to inspire you and give direction for your own personal daily work life. You can find links and other information from this show at davehilgendorf.com. Until next time, have a great day and God bless.